So my name is Dave Otter. I am Leadership and Management Lead at DAC Beechcroft, which is a large international law firm. I've worked in the field of leadership and management development for probably 15 to 20 years and have been very interested and specialised in a lot of resilience, mindset and mental toughness from a personal interest point of view, but also from a professional point of view as well. I really got interested in the book because I felt it was an area of real interest for me. I've done a lot of work in developing teams. I've done a lot of work in developing cultures and also supporting individuals with their resilience and mental well-being and health. I've been through some personally challenging times as well in recent years, and I felt that I had something to say in this space. And was very delighted when Doug and Claudine asked if I'd be interested in contributing. I'd worked with AQR for a number of years and really felt that the NTQ 48 report or metric in particular brought something different and something that was really important into the conversation. So my chapter is about resilient teams or high-performing teams and really trying to give a bit of a blueprint as to where someone might want to start in terms of developing a high-performing and resilient team, because I think those two phrases are really important. They sit alongside each other. Having worked in some areas of professional sport, and I'm a climber personally, so I like to go out and do stupid things on high cliffs. I think resilience is a really important part of a high-performing team. The ability to recover from a challenging situation, what used to be called bounce back ability, I think, in the old days, but also the ability to prepare for challenging situations. So often called bounce forward ability these days, in that, how are we as a team going to plan for when things go wrong, and how are we going to implement those when we need to. In the world of professional sport, that's quite common. A man gets sent off or something's going wrong with the plan. What do we do? Well, we've got plan C, D, and E. Sometimes think in the world of business, don't always see that. You see risk mitigation, you see disaster recovery plans. They're big and grandiose, but what does it mean to the team if things aren't going right on a day-to-day basis? And I think that's where I'm interested and where I really think the mental toughness concept supports that.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I think never heard it called bounce forward. Really like that. But I agree. I think for most organizations and most teams, the focus is on doing, and they never really create the time to do the thinking. And that's a real challenge for organizations, particularly now more than ever, with resource constraints and more work to do with less resource. They really don't take the time to do the thinking. And I always say to people, look, we live life twice, don't we? We live life first in our minds and how we view the world, and then we live out in real life. And I talk to people about that being a real life hack. And if they can understand that and create the time to do the thinking, that really makes a profound impact on their performance.
100%.
So I think that's really interesting. What's also interesting for me is, if we think about this in the round, you've got high performing teams, but most leadership theory and performance theory talks about individuals. So how do you take what, and you mentioned the MTQ 48 as a measure, which is very much an individual measure. It measures your mindset, your mental toughness. How do you then use that in terms of that team context to kind of add value?
I think this is where your chapter and my chapter really resonate when it comes to this area, because I wrote a very short article about why there is an I in team. I really do think that individuals clearly come together to form a high-performing team, but there is a place. I know the old saying was there isn't an I in team, but there is. And I think you have to understand your position and your role and how you act in that team. And so self-awareness, which is the thing we try and work on the most with leaders, which is often the thing they tend to forget about a little bit. They focus on the numbers and the doing, as you say. that self-awareness, that awareness of how you react, how you behave, how you contribute to a team environment, I think is more important than not.
Yeah,
And my chapter in the book was really trying to pull together a number of slightly different theories in this area. Some of the classic pieces of work, we could look at Belbin, who interestingly said there's only really should be 6 people in a team. Otherwise, it's a group of individuals trying to work together. And I think that's quite an interesting point. You can have teams that are way too big and far too difficult to manage. And again, I touched upon the complexity of that in the book. But until people understand their role in that team, their position, then I don't think you've got a high performing team. And what I really liked about MTQ is that it's really one of the very few, if at all, the only psychometric or structure that gives you an understanding about how you act in different situations. We kind of understand sometimes how we feel. There's lots of metrics out there that help you understand how you feel, how you act, and how you think. There's a lot less. And I think MTQ really helps give you context around that, because the components of MTQ, challenge, confidence, commitment, and the other one, control, are really, really key, I think, to understanding your role in the team, how you take control, how you commit within that team environment. I think is fundamental. And I reference a work by Dr. Kaz Stewart in the book, and I've worked with Kaz over a number of years, and she talks about this identity. Now, in an organizational environment, that might be values, it could be purpose, it could be mission, but the team have to have a recognizable identity. This is who we are. And then that brings you together. And I think even now in a hybrid world, and my firm works in a hybrid world, that's harder. In a team environment, it's the person to your left and your right that you go into battle for. And I've worked with the army, and it's the guy on the left and the lady on the right who stand next to you that gives you that identity. And I think in a hybrid world, it's harder. Absolutely. And I think MTQ can help us understand that a little bit more. It gives a little bit more context, as Kaz would call it, context to how our team is coming together.
Yeah. No, listen, I think it's really fascinating. How different teams. I mean, we both ended up in the same sector at the moment. We're both working in the legal sector. And we both look at this from a team dimension. When you work with different teams, do you see, so for example, we've had a brief conversation before about how the legal sector may be different to other sectors in terms of the kind of personalities and team leadership styles. As you look back on your work and your career, have you seen kind of different mental toughness profiles from different sectors or different types of teams?
Yeah, I think the industries I've worked in most recently, you might term knowledge industries. So law industry, aviation, nuclear engineering. These are industries that drive individual knowledge and capability. And I think clearly you can become very good in your area of specialism by being very good at your job. And then what we tend to see is that suddenly that individual finds that they've been asked to manage a team, or to run a team, or to run a project, or to run a matrix team, and they may not have that skill set. And so it will come down to some degree mindset, actually. How am I going to go into this? How am I going to tackle this new challenge for me? And what is my thinking around this? So again, this is where MTQ really helps, because it understands my approach to the work I'm going to be asked to do. How controlling am I going to be? How committed am I going to be? How open am I to change and challenge in this environment? And sometimes you see the best and worst in these industries, because I've always done it this way, and this is the way everybody else is going to do it. Clearly, when you've got more interpersonal confidence, you can open up the conversation. If you've got a little bit more understanding about your levels of challenge and commitment and control, then you become a much better leader by being able to adopt the key skills. I mean, we call it situational leadership now, but I think you might argue it's common sense. It's, how am I going to interact with these individuals to take them forward? Because I'm reliant on them to deliver the big number, the big target, the task, as John Adair called it. And therefore, if they don't have that awareness, then what we tend to find is those teams don't work very well. They get through sometimes, but they could and should be better, I think, by having time to think, as you reference it, that ability to step back and go, right, what's the best way to do this? How am I going to bring the team together? And we see it very often in the professional sports world because feedback's very quick. If you go into a game of rugby, you've got 80 minutes to get it right, and you know if it's gone wrong. I think in the world of business, it takes longer. It can take years, really, before you truly know, has that had the impact that we wanted? So there's a longer lead in time, but I think professional sport can teach us quite a bit about this sort of thing. And again, when we talk about culture for yourself, I think also professional sport needs to learn some stuff from the world of business in terms of the right sort of culture to drive forward to a collaborative goal where everybody feels comfortable and their well-being is looked after.
Yeah. No, I think it's really interesting. One of the things I often find when I'm working with teams, and it's one of the, if we're being honest, it's one of the accidental challenges with the mental toughness questionnaire. Is it measures things on a scale of 1 to 10, which has its really useful benefits, because it does tell you relative where you are against the global population, and it also helps you identify where you're making progress. So you can track progress through having such a scale. One of the challenges I find with teams is the fact that they gravitate to the numbers. We've all been conditioned from a young age to think 10 is better than 1.
Yes.
So suddenly they're having conversations about, they're 6, that's not very good, we need a 9.
It's not a race to the top.
And they seem to have the think, oh, exactly. They seem to have this concept, don't they, that, higher numbers are better here. And I guess that's a real challenge in some teams. And, I'll put the question to you. You're talking about high performance teams. So they'd all be 10s, wouldn't they? The best teams will all be 10s.
I couldn't think of a worse team, in all honesty, in the level of challenge and conflict that you might get with people being that certain, that confident, that committed, I think would cause a number of issues. And I think clearly, as you and I both know, it's not a race to the top, it's awareness.
Yeah.
I would argue it's a race to the middle, maybe, in terms of the normative distribution of how this works. Some of the best leaders and managers I've worked with are what we might call mentally sensitive. They're incredibly aware of the impact they have, and they're incredibly intuitive of the people that they work with and for and who work for them. And they pick up on real subtleties of behavior that maybe someone with let's say a tougher mental toughness profile might not pick up on, because those individuals are already thinking about solutions, whereas the mentally sensitive leader is really compassionate, empathetic. These are all words we hear a lot in the modern day leadership development world, but they're about people being people and being socially aware. And I think that's what works so well with the framework, is that it doesn't matter where you are. Yes, we probably like to move you towards the middle, so that, any of the extreme examples you might see with the high and low don't necessarily show, but I'd much rather work with a leader who's more sensitive and attuned to my way of thinking. The final piece for me would be going back to Kaz Stewart's work on empowerment. I would think people who are very strong and very mentally certain would say, there you go, I've empowered you, you're off and running. And I really don't think that's possible. You can't empower people, is my view. They have to take that step forward. You can set up the areas to say, look, there's all the information, there's the structures, there's the guidance, there's the strategy. Are you ready to step in and take some control of your life and control of the job? And it's that final maybe 10% where they come with you, where they become empowered, what Kaz would call agency. They have agency. They feel like they control their lives and in control of their situation. Clearly, these are phrases I'm using that resonate with mental toughness around emotional control, life control. I think someone who is empowered has more control in those areas and feels like they're in control of their destiny. And then if we look at the team being empowered, they're in control of their destiny, they can contribute. And as I touched upon in the book, when I talk about Leicester City, the team felt they could really produce. And the real twist of the story was, 6 months later, the manager of Leicester City lost his job because he'd lost the dressing room, it was called. The team didn't feel like they were going in the same direction. And that's how teams will work. very often is they come together collaboratively. So yeah, really interesting story from the Leicester City. I'm not a massive Leicester City football fan, but really interesting story that came to the fore there. And we may see that again, but not in a hurry.
Yeah, and I think one of the other points you touch upon in the book that really resonated with me, and yeah, certainly in terms of my work with senior leadership teams, it's this concept that, you know, leadership as a concept has evolved. I mean, there's mountains written on leadership. I spend most of my life in the culture world, and I think I have some stat like if you search leadership on Amazon on their online bookstore, you get over 1 million books, and if you search culture, you get 10,000. Yeah, there's so much less written on culture, and yet the leadership team largely set the culture, which is quite interesting. But one of the things I find really interesting about how leadership has changed, you have almost gone from this idea that the leader and the leadership team need to be the performers. They need to lead by going over the top first, as we would have done in the military context.
Henry V,
you know, and you know, now leadership is about setting out that environment for others to succeed and being the conductor of the orchestra rather than playing every instrument in the orchestra. You know, and I think that self-awareness about that and linking self-awareness about your own behavior and your own traits alongside that kind of recasting of what effective leadership is really key to help people become the best versions of themselves, really.
Do you know what? I think that's a perfect summary because, the orchestra, the conductor, you know, are you a one-man band playing all the instruments, or are you, you know, a symphonic orchestra? And I think that's where we need to get to, the notion that the leader conducts experts in their field to be the very best collectively. And I think that's a really nice analogy.